Hello and thank you for downloading ColorPerfect. With this screencast I'd like to help you to get started with our plugin. I will begin by illustrating how to convert a digital camera RAW image with ColorPerfect's new feature PerfectRAW, because all essential image editing steps used in that also apply to working with color negative film. The advantage of starting with a digital image is that I can first show many things that are essential for all ColorPerfect users and address the matter of characterizing color negative film at the end of this video when you're already more familiar with ColorPerfect. I have just started our auxiliary program MakeTIFF, which you can also download from our webpage at www.colorneg.com. MakeTIFF is used to convert digital camera RAW images into linear TIFF files. Photoshop can then open these without the forced processing by Adobe Camera Raw. The raw image files or folders containing such files are simply dragged onto MakeTIFF's interface, and an according TIFF file gets created. The only setting to point out at this point is that you can specify which RGB color space you'd like MakeTIFF to assign to your TIFF files. Once we have created the TIFF file, we can exit MakeTIFF and open the image in Photoshop. ColorPerfect is found in the Filter menu's CF Systems category. In the following, we will be using ColorPos mode, and not one of the other two modes, ColorNeg or TouchUp. On the Start panel that is only accessible now, we must make sure that the same RGB color space we chose in MakeTIFF is selected. To use PerfectRAW, we need to tick the according checkbox on the Start panel in ColorPos mode. The final element on the Start panel is the Register button, via which you can later enter your license key. Then leave this dialog by pressing OK and exit ColorPerfect once more by pressing either OK or Cancel. The next time you start the plugin, the grid in the preview and final image is gone and ColorPerfect is registered to your name. So let's again activate PerfectRAW. First we should select the digital camera used from the lists of makers and cameras. The image at hand was shot using a Nikon D200. Next we will get acquainted with many of ColorPerfect's user interface elements in a sensible order. But before we start with that, let me point out ColorPerfect's help system, which can always be invoked by pressing the help button and is used by actuating any of ColorPerfect's interface elements. Once we have read enough, the help system can be closed using the according button. ColorPerfect provides the means to store intermediate states in your image editing. For that, we have the Save List feature at the upper edge of the plugin. When we press the corresponding button, the current state of our image editing is saved in the list, and the list automatically advances to a new entry which can be used later to store another editing state. We can now always return to the state labeled A. First, I'd like to show you how to pen over the preview image. For that, we can perform a right click on any position in the preview image and zoom into this point by selecting a higher magnification. In doing that, the position chosen by right click becomes the preview's new center. Using subsequent right clicks, we can then pen over the image until we arrive at an edge. Each right click in this corresponds to the behavior in Photoshop when grabbing the image at the according position and dragging it to the viewport's center. But let's return to the spire I selected before. With its aid, I'd like to give you a short introduction to color correction using CC filters in ColorPerfect. A regular click into the preview can always be used to define a surface in the image that should be rendered as a gray. When we perform such a click on the top of the spire, it becomes gray and all other colors in the image follow this adjustment. The scene shown has been captured in the final light of a summer day, and there is a considerable difference between the color balance in the late sunlight and that in the shady parts facing the sky. After having chosen a color balance by click, the values in effect are displayed in the CC filter area as a so-called CC filter pack. CC filters in ColorPerfect are essentially equivalent to those known from analog photography. Using the CC Ref button, we can define any state of color correction as a reference. By pressing the button now, we let the complete correction of the grays and the shades become our reference. If we next click on what should be a neutral surface in late sunlight, we will get a CC filter pack that is relative to the illumination of the shady parts of the image. If we like, we can then alter the CC filter pack numerically so that we get to a state of correction between the extremes. Furthermore, one can always enter relative CC filter values. For example, we can enter plus 10R, which will alter the image's color balance by a value of 10 in direction of red, or accordingly we can enter minus 10R, which will restore our original color balance. In addition to working with CC filter values directly, ColorPerfect provides the Ring CC feature. It can be used in combination with the zoom settings to adjust an image based on 8 altered versions. The general proceeding in that is as follows. If we felt that our image should be more blue, we would click on the bluish preview and the image in the center would then converge halfway towards the bluish version with each click. We could do the same with the other primary or secondary primary colors, or we could adjust the step size of the ring around, which would allow us to fine-tune the image's color using small CC changes. We exit the ring around by activating any of the other features. Since I already liked the color balance prior to introducing the CC ring feature, I will now show you how ColorPerfect's history works. Using the undo button, we can step back to the state of image adjustment prior to using the ring around. The redo button in the same area works accordingly, and the reset button restarts the plugin, which I will not show right now. We have now seen the basics of using CC filters in ColorPerfect and can employ the Save List feature again to store a version B of our adjustment. We will now always be able to return to version A, our initial editing state, and version B, our established color balance. The list entry C is the name for the state to be stored by the next click of Save Lists plus button. Next, let me introduce the basic image editing controls in ColorPerfect. The most basic control is adding and removing black, which equals changing the exposure in other systems. Why we use the name black for this will become clearer when we visit the next control, which is white. Removing black brightens the image, while adding black darkens the image. For this function we have reversed the scroll bar's response, because most users intuitively expect scrolling up to brighten the image and scrolling down to darken it. This behavior can be customized in ColorPerfect's options. While changing the exposure by adding or removing black, we can observe the clip readout up here. It shows how many pixels in percent take on the maximum value in one or multiple color channels. On an imagined 8-bit scale, that would be a value of 255. We don't need to worry about this clipping too much at this point, because these values can usually be brought back into the valid tonal range by use of ColorPerfect's highlight compression system. To use it, we first choose a number of f-stops to be compressed. For example, we can select one exposure value beyond what would normally be the maximum brightness and a range, again in 8-bit logic, into which we'd like to compress these tonal values. For example, the range down to the conceived 8-bit tonal value of 240. Note that the actual clipping is now 0. If we were to choose fewer exposure values to compress, a little clipping would remain in specular highlights, which is often even beneficial to an image. Of course, we can still add or remove black even if we have already set up the highlight compression. It might be interesting to note that a function exists that allows us to toggle the highlight compression system on and off in general, so that we can assess its effect. This can be useful when one would like to further adjust the exposure and would like to see what effect the altered values for black have on the brightest portions of an image. The sibling function of adding and removing black is the adding and removing of white. Let's first look at adding white. This can also be thought of as the physically correct adding of fog or haze to a scene, which by no means equals the effect of the shadow slider in Photoshop's levels or curves. Contrary to adding white, the removing of white lessens haze, fog or similar effects in a scene, which is a vital means to control an image's contrast. Again, the clipping in the depths can be observed in a readout up here, and again we don't need to overly worry about it, because there is a compression system for the shadows too. To be able to better judge the effect, let's perform a right click on a dark portion of the image to look at removing white in detail. Essentially, we are trying to find a suitable value to experiment with the shadow compression system afterwards. What the entire system of white and shadow compression does to our image, we can easily visualize by toggling the white control off and back on. The fact that a clipping output remains even though the shadow compression is in effect is due to the black point adjustment. The black point control that can be accessed via the button to toggle between BP tails and B point is not well suited for user adjustments. Because of that, we have implemented the BP tails control, which scrolls significantly better and controls both the black point and the associated BP color. Defining black point via BP tails means choosing the point from which on pixels become pure black. This actually is important for photos because it would be fallacious to assume that every deeply dark part of an image would be able to convey texture and detail. If I use this control extremely, we see that it also influences the image's contrast, but stays unaffected by the compression of the shadows. What we should aim to do here is establishing a setting at which some of the darkest parts of the image stay pure black in a plausible and pleasant way. The next control on our list of image adjustments in ColorPerfect is saturation. This is nearly as basic as black and white. Saturation can be used to let an image appear a little more colorful or accordingly less colorful. Personally, I often prefer a slightly increased saturation. It's worth noting that ColorPerfect saturation feature is unique and does not equal controls with the same name that are part of other systems, but rather has an actually solid physical basis. You will quickly notice the difference as our adjustments usually seem much more natural. Below saturation, you will find the gamma control for artistic purposes. While it does not resemble the middle gray slider in Photoshop's levels or its simple curves, could fill its own video. At this point, I'd like to limit the topic by saying that ColorPerfect can treat color and brightness detached from one another in a unique way, so that even using gamma will preserve the correct colors in an image. We can thus use gamma to alter an image's underlying grayscale or brightness values in one direction or the other. This can be visualized by a curve overlay on the preview image. This plot is read from left to right as from dark to bright. Upward changes indicate that a tonal value was brightened, and downward changes accordingly indicate that a tonal value was darkened. If we now toggle the gamma control off, we can continue by taking a quick look at ColorPerfect's zonal panel, which allows even more elaborate adjustments to an image's underlying brightness values. With zones, it is possible to alter individually chosen brightness values independent from one another. For example, we could let a middle gray stay unchanged, while we make a darker gray darker still, and brighten a light gray. In total, this adjustment again influences an image's perceived contrast. Another unique feature in ColorPerfect is moderate, which is used to lessen or intensify an entire zone adjustment. With adjustments that influence contrast, one usually tends to overdo it, and it is most often a good idea to reassess the chosen values via moderate, and to settle on somewhat lessened values if such prove equally useful. Of course, moderate can also be used after zooming in on the image, and without the curve overlay, in order to better judge what's happening. A somewhat hidden adjustment that we didn't look at yet is the tonal control, which is another means to alter an image's underlying grayscale. With this, it is possible to change the amount of influence the three color components red, green and blue have on an image's brightness. Tonal really acts like using colored filters in analog black and white photography, only that it works on color images. We could adjust the image at hand so that red has a stronger influence on the image's brightness, or a smaller one. For some images, the tonal control will really achieve spectacular effects, while for others it makes less of a difference, like for the current image. While tonal is active, the Clear CC button can be used to reset the feature's values. In the normal mode of operations of the CC filter area, Clear CC leads back to the initial CC reference point. In this case, we didn't intend to return there, and so we quickly undo this step using ColorPerfect's history. When using Make TIFF in PerfectRAW, the color balance recorded by the digital camera gets transferred to ColorPerfect and stays accessible via the buttons of the color balance source area. The button Save as Best allows us to store a CC filter pack we find useful in an additional state. If we now toggle through the different states by actuating the other button several times in a row, we notice that our previously chosen color balance appears both under Best and Working. Working always refers to the CC filter pack we chose last, for example by clicking into the preview, while Best is preserved until we override it by pressing the according button again. We can always return to the color balance recorded by the camera or to what would have been ColorPerfect's initial automatic estimate, or to any saved Best filter pack. The sample image used here is available for download below this video when it's viewed on our webpage, and you can download it to experiment with it yourself. If you do so, you should really compare your results to those you get from conventional RAW processing systems, as I am certain you'll be surprised by the difference. As soon as we are happy with the state of our editing, we can leave ColorPerfect via the OK button. Another detail I'd like to mention at this point is the fact that ColorPerfect allows you to use selections. If I set up a luminance mask in Photoshop and then call ColorPerfect again, switch to touch-up mode and tick the checkbox Use Selection, I can adjust brighter and darker portions of the image in a gradual flow by adjusting the inner part of the selection, the brighter tones, or the outer part of the selection, the darker tones, individually. When doing this, we can for example select the brighter tones of the image and remove some more white from them, and leave the plugin by pressing OK again. For comparisons to other RAW converters, it should be noted that the workflow with Make TIFF and ColorPerfect we used does not include any sharpening or noise reduction. The latter usually also impairs detail and sometimes the color of small objects, so that it is often doubtful if it is rather useful or harmful to an image. The sharpening can easily be accomplished in Photoshop by using the Unsharp Mask command. For example, with values of 120, a radius of 0.8 pixels and a threshold of 2. To conclude, let's take a look at processing a color negative after all. The most important part when working with negatives in general is creating suitable scans. This gets detailed in various tutorials for different scanner software on our webpage. After we have created a suitable scan, we should make sure that there no longer are parts of the film's unexposed mask or the scanner's film holder in the image before we invoke ColorPerfect and choose ColorNeg mode. The negative at hand is a historic travel photo. I do not know the exact date of the trip, but my estimate would be the 1970s. Because of an additional soot coating of its lower side, such material could not even be processed in regular labs. The first thing to point out after having chosen ColorNeg mode and having set up that this is a linear scan to which an sRGB profile was assigned is that once the film has been characterized, as we will address next, all the tools I introduced using PerfectRAW will also be available for our negative. We can first try to find a suitable characterization among the large number of built-in color negative film types. In case of our old movie stock, it is likely that none of these will yield a perfect result, which of course is why I chose this image in the first place, as that allows me to show you a feature that is exclusively available in the two modes dealing with film. That feature is the Film Type Subtype Film Gamma Calibration System. To use it, one generally needs to click onto a surface in the scene that represents some medium gray. It can also be useful to crank up saturation to an unnaturally high level, as that will allow us to notice even subtle color shifts. The further proceeding is as follows. Using the film type control, we slowly scroll across the entire range of values once and observe the changes to our image. Afterwards, we return to the region that seemed most natural to us. Now we can toggle to subtype mode, using the button currently labeled film type, and can repeat the process. The third control of the calibration system is film gamma, which should not be confused with the gamma for artistic purposes we looked at earlier, but only is used when characterizing film. While using the calibration system, the 3 established film gammas are put out in the readout down here. We will often require quite a bit of back and forth in search of the ideal settings. After having characterized a film like this, we can enter a new name into the list of film types. By pressing the Add Change button, this entry is then temporarily added to the user list, but it is required to save this list to a file for the value to stay available for future ColorPerfect sessions. We can now also reset saturation to a normal level. Independent of whether you found a suitable characterization among the built-in ones or characterized your film with the method shown, it will be relatively easy afterwards to further adjust your photos using the various controls in ColorPerfect so that they suit your wishes. In case of the historic travel photo, a significant increase in saturation seems beneficial. We can also observe that black point often behaves significantly different from the way it would for digital photos when working with film. In general, it is best to adjust BP tails directly after having chosen the film type, if such an adjustment is needed. I hope that this broad introduction video was useful to you, and now wish you to have fun discovering what ColorPerfect can do for both your digital and digitized analog photography.